Beyond the top stories here, we delve into some of the Sunday newspapers. We've got the Sunday Times, the Sunday World, the Sunday Tribune. And for this discussion this afternoon, we're going to be joined by Rochelle de Kock, who is the Herald editor. Rochelle, good afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us here on the SABC at this hour.
Good afternoon, Liesl, and thanks for having me.
I want to perhaps turn our attention to the Sunday Times and the Sunday Tribune. I can see that, both are in fact leading with similar stories. Sunday Tribune going with crucial talks between Trump and Ramaphosa. And obviously the Sunday Times, they're also calling it showtime, folks. So we've seen pictures of President Ramaphosa and his delegation versus the U.S. president and his delegation. It's been said that this is an invitation and that South Africa is welcome. And so perhaps we could get into what is set to top the agenda. Perhaps given the policies that have been questioned on both sides, or perhaps trying to explain the misinterpretation thereof, what comes to the fore for you?
Look, I think we all have our eyes on what's ahead this week. It is indeed showtime. We know that, it follows really months of tension, perhaps more so from the US side than South Africa, but we've definitely been on Donald Trump's radar. And it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens. And South Africa's delegation, that is going to be led by President Ramaphosa, is actually preparing for humiliation dressing down. Because, we've seen what happened with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky when he was sitting in the Oval Office and was humiliated in front of the world's cameras. And so I think our president, along with Ministers Park Stow and Minister Lamola, are preparing for the worst. They know there's a lot that's at stake here. The US is an important trade partner, and it's going to require cool heads. And I think that's essentially what we all are going to be looking at in the week ahead.
And if we're even just looking at who's representing both sides, the delegation that has been chosen, are you able to jump into what the significance of that is also going to entail, perhaps from a trade relations perspective, as well as a diplomatic perspective?
Look, it is important. I think Ministers Tau and Lamola do bring cool heads. They're very well versed in diplomacy and being able to handle, sticky situations, that the South African government might have to navigate. But on the US side, we have a situation where there is a strong likelihood that Marco Rubio is going to be leading the delegation from the US side. That's the US Secretary of State. And then there is a very strong likelihood that Elon Musk is going to be there as well. Yeah. And we know that he's been very vocal, very anti-South African laws of late, and he might just use that opportunity to bring in his issues of wanting to bring Starlink into South Africa and criticizing the BEE laws, as well as the Expropriation Act and a number of other issues. And, a big issue we've seen ventilated on social media, particularly on X, is his issue with the Kill the Boer song. And EFF leader Julius Malema's continued singing of this song. And of course, we can't run away from the fact that this meeting is going to take place when just last week, there were 59 South Africans, refugees, who were moved over to the US seeking asylum. So that's going to be a top of the agenda. And I think we can't run away from the fact that the president he should expect an attempt to humiliate him. But I think we do know President Ramaphosa. He's been in situations where it's been hostile, and he remains, calm and dignified in such situations. We hope that it's going to be the same.
Questions about that obviously come to the fore in terms of treatment, because we saw the engagement between the Ukraine president and Donald Trump, and even, the Vice President J.D. Vance. And there were some concerns on that front, what precedents that also set. And I wonder if that has any impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You look, AGOA is a big one. we do know that many of the businesses in South Africa, the industries, they rely on some of the discounts or the duty-free trade that they get from AGOA. But I think what's also quite interesting is that and I neglected to mention is that John Steenhuisen is expected to also be part of the South African delegation, and his role is expected to, I suppose, be twofold really. One, to promote trade on farming products in South Africa, but also we mustn't forget that his presence there would be quite important to rebut some of the claims of there being white genocide. And I think you'd be able to attest to that, in real time with some of the delegates from the US side. So that's going to be quite an important one. What's interesting as well is the fact that and I'll speak specifically in the Eastern Cape. A big issue here is the auto industry. It might perhaps be a smaller issue in the South African context, and the contribution towards GDP, but in the Eastern Cape, it's a lifeline. The auto industry. And I know that, some of the big companies here, Mercedes-Benz particularly, has been hard hit. If the sky-high tariffs are actually, implemented again, because 50% of some of their luxury vehicles are actually exported to the US, and that's a big blow to them. So that a lot hinges, I think, on these discussions on Wednesday, and it does require cool heads. But as you said, we've seen what's happened with Zelensky. We saw what, a little bit of an attempt with the Canadian president as well, and where he said, Canada's not for sale. And Trump's response was, well, for now, or we'll see, or something along those lines. So there's a lot at stake here. And I think President Ramaphosa and his delegation must be prepared for the worst, really.
Because if we're even looking at policy issues, I mean, there's the ICJ Israel-Gaza case that South Africa brought forth, before the ICC. And so as we're looking at that ongoing developments as well, it's definitely going to be a thorn in the works for, both sides to address, particularly because the USA obviously is an ally to Israel. Rochelle, G20, it's also coming up. We heard President Donald Trump admitting that he will not come unless the situation is quelled, for just me obviously paraphrasing there. That's also another big thing. I mean, the G20 ultimately accounts for over 70 to 80% of the world's economic activity. And so the presence of such a powerhouse at the shifting geopolitical landscape must be a cause for concern or raise more questions.
Absolutely, no, definitely. And you must remember that South Africa is going to be handing over to the US to host the next G20. So that's a big factor. And that's going to also be important in those discussions. And I think South Africa cannot go there. The South African delegation cannot go there with, simply wanting to have their say and not accept the fact that we do also need the US. So I think it's just trying to find that balance, but really clearing up any misconceptions that, we are a country that, that promotes genocide and that we are persecuting white Afrikaners specifically. And so that's going to be quite important. And then I think there's going to be some wins and there's going to be some losses. But what is important is that relationship is really, we just start to rebuild, because the way things are now, how do we get to hand over the G20 to the US when things are so tense? It's very, very important. And South Africa being the host of G20, if a US president is snubbing it, it doesn't look good for South Africa.
Yes, and I wonder even because just below that picture, I mean, there's a byline that reads, some rough road lies ahead for our Amerikaners. That's on the Sunday Times. I just want to wrap up on that front because we're obviously just looking at assimilation. Why, their process was fast-tracked. There's debates about white replacement theories that's happening the world over, given globalization. And I wonder, as those debates ensue, tell us a little bit more about what Makudu's writing there when it comes to, them now reintegrating. There's even questions about whether they are also allowed to come back, as opposed to other immigrants who are, trying to apply, seek asylum with legitimate reasons, and they obviously have not been considered at this point as well.
Yeah. Look, what is interesting is Sunday Times sort of takes you, into the profile of some of the people that have left for the US and are being settled there. And what is interesting is that, in fact, they speak to one of the Amerikaners who has actually never been an Afrikaner. Well, he isn't. He's English, but he uses the excuse to say no. His family were Afrikaners, and they chose to choose English as their primary language just to make it easier for them in South Africa. And what we do see is that some of them were never farmers. One that came out earlier this week, he speaks about the fact that he had to leave his five bedroom house and his mother behind. And then there's other reports that this individual is in fact running away from debt. So it's actually interesting to see some of the caliber really of the people that have fled
Yeah.
seeking refugee status in the US. I think we're still going to have a lot of that, and also some of the vetting process has also come under scrutiny. And I see that one of the news outlets is reporting, I think it might be News 24, that's reporting that there's questions about how the airline that was chartered and landed in South Africa to take these refugees, how they were actually given permission. So that's actually quite an interesting thing. And I think South African government has really they've just allowed it to happen because they don't want to be seen to be resisting it either, particularly because, the relationship between South Africa and the US is really frayed at the moment.
Yeah. Rochelle, I need to move on, and just in the interest of time, just as we wrap up on the Sunday Tribune, I mean, we're obviously seeing disturbing allegations following the student deaths, student doctor's death on duty. Aluluto Mazwai was 25. And then obviously also Finance Minister facing budget, chats, of course, as he said, to the retail budget now without VAT. That's a big talker there. Do you want to weigh in very quickly as I just open up the Sunday World before we get into that top story there?
Now, look, it's Budget 3.0 this week, Wednesday as well. Wednesday is going to be a big day for South Africa, and particularly for us journalists.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be a lot of interest in what's taking place. We know that it's the third attempt after a backlash from the VAT hike proposals previously. Minister Kodongwana not meeting eye to eye with some of the GNU partners, and even within his own ranks of the ANC on some of the proposals that's been put forward. So I think there's going to be a lot of eyes and trying to see how he's going to balance the 75 billion rand budget shortfall. And that's going to have to be thrashed out. It's going to be a big one for South Africa. And I think what happens on Wednesday, both in the US as well as, from Minister Kodongwana, is going to really play a big role in our economy in the weeks ahead.
Rochelle, as we wrap up there, just the Sunday World, lots of headlines. Let's speak to the main story there. Mantashe's son speaks out. I think it's unfair that I'm found guilty in the court of public opinion because I'm born of a politician. So Buyambo, they're speaking to his axing about CETA board chairperson, nepotism, questions about, more questions coming through about that appointment. Given the state of affairs and really transformation at large, what are you unpacking there just as we wrap up?
Look, I mean, social media was abuzz this week when a list was leaked of Higher Education Minister Ngabeni, who had appointed various chairs of CETA boards as well as board chairpersons. And I think the big issue was the fact that it was so politically heavy. There were a lot of former MECs. I think there's KZN's former premier was there. And then one that really caught everybody's attention was Gwede Mantashe's son, Buyambo Mantashe, and the fact that he he's made it onto the board. And I think this is what caused the outcry. And the questions have really been about whether or not it is suitable for politicians to be appointed to lead boards, particularly CETAs, which control billions of rand in skills development funding. And we know that the president is said to have intervened, and the minister has then since recanted on that decision. But I think, and some of the appointments have been cancelled, but I think it's more just about questions about transparency, and also raising questions about how board members are actually chosen. Are they qualified? Especially as the scene, the CETAs are seen as cash cows, really. So yeah, it's a question about politicization of institutions that are meant to serve South Africans, and that's the big issue here. According to Mr. Mantashe's LinkedIn, he is qualified. He served on quite a number of boards. He's got a lot of experience, particularly in the agriculture sector. Some are saying, I just peeped on social media on X this morning. Some are saying he should rather just keep quiet, because him speaking out on it is just going to raise alarm bells every single time his name pops up anywhere. Yeah.
Well, Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us.